Irrational reasoning involves listening to the evidence and making lists of pros and cons, or using deductive or inductive reasoning like we studied last chapter. We call that rational reasoning. But a lot of people reason irrationally, meaning they don't work things out in their mind correctly. And it is the reason why most people in society, it's the reason for a lot of society's problems. Things like prejudice and bigotry and just not being able to think correctly has its bases in this irrational reasoning that most people do. So we're going to talk about it. For instance, people tend to exaggerate the improbable. People tend to take individual occurrences that they hear about and apply it to themselves or to everyone as a whole. For instance, what did you say the odds were more likely of dying from disease or dying from accident?
Disease.
How many wrote disease? How many wrote accident? That's usually the case. It's about half and half, people say. But in actuality, the odds are much better of dying of disease, and the odds are 16 to 1. Disease to accident.
Oh, pretty good.
You have way more chance of dying from disease. So why do most people think?
Wouldn't that depend
People
on
don't
the
say
way
like
the
someone
way
dies from
people
disease.
live?
Yeah, it depends on where you live.
It is different for individuals, but as a whole, the world as a whole, 16 times the people die from disease than die from accident. 16 times. And it's much more likely that you're going to die from a disease than from accident. So, why do people think that accidents are so likely?
Is it because they read more about people dying and not accidents?
The media is one big part. You hear more about people dying.
What if it's
When you see somebody in an accident or you hear about an accident, you tend to replay it over and over in your head. You tend to think about it more. Rather than somebody who died of cancer, you don't think about that as much. And so since you play it over in your head more, you think about it more, and especially on TV, you see it more. Every movie has accidents, you know. You hear about people getting shot on the news. You figure, because you can think about it more easily, that it's more likely, which is not true. Yes?
What if the disease was an accident?
Then it's disease, because you died from the disease. So we call that exaggerating the improbable. Have you ever seen that you can go on, I don't know if you've seen this, you can go on airlines, you can buy their crash insurance. You ever seen this? It's only like $1. You can pay $1 for airline crash insurance. It's the most profitable insurance sold.
Because airplane
People
crashes.
buy it, pay $1, and if their airplane crashes, they get whatever, $100,000. Or if you pay more, you get even more. You know, you pay $10, you get $1 million. If you're, of course, you won't get it. Your family gets it. But people will buy that insurance like it's a form of life insurance. Because planes hardly ever crash. So they make so much money and hardly ever have to pay out. So the idea here is that people think it's likely to happen, but it's really not. And exaggerating the improbable is one of the things that a lot of people do. Like I said at the beginning of the year, I don't know if you remember this, after 9/11, so everybody's scared to fly. So people stopped flying. The amount of automobile deaths went way up after 9/11 because people were driving instead of flying. And driving is not as safe. So exaggerating the improbable actually caused more deaths than the towers, that died in the actual towers themselves. which is amazing. And that's just something you tend to do. You exaggerate what might happen, and you think about it, and you often are thinking incorrectly because of that. And so that's why it's a barrier to reasoning rationally. You're not reasoning rationally when you are thinking that you might die in a plane crash. Of course you might. There is always a chance, but the chance is a lot less than you think it is. The availability heuristic, the tendency to... we just talked about that. Okay, avoiding loss. Here's another thing. People try to minimize risks and loss when making decisions. People don't like loss. So this is the one you answered on the sheet. Problem 1 was the first problem I gave to you. You have to pick a program. There's 2 programs. In the first program, there's a 100% probability that 1/3 of the people are saved. In the second program, there's a 1/3 probability that all are saved, and there's a 2/3 probability that none is saved. Which one of the 2 did you pick?
First one.
Most people pick the first one. Problem 2. The first program, 100% probability that 2/3 of the people die, or 1/3 probability that nobody dies, and 2/3 probability that everybody dies. Which program did you pick?
First one.
First one.
Most people pick the second one here. Most people pick the first one here and the second one here. And it's because of the way it's phrased. Here, it's phrased as people are being saved. And here it's phrased that people are dying. And in actuality, the first programs of each problem are the same, aren't they?
Yeah.
If you study it close enough, that program and that program are both the same program. And same with the second program. This and that are the same. But people tend to pick this program when faced with problem 1 and this program when faced with problem 2. Because people tend to want to avoid loss. They don't want any loss. So when you say that it's 100% probability that 2/3 of the people are going to die, people think, well, I'm not going to do that one then. I'll take this one because there's a chance that nobody dies. Because that's how it was stated. So we all want to avoid loss at whatever reasons possible, and you may not reason correctly because you're always trying to avoid loss. How about this game, the confirmation bias? The tendency to look for or pay attention to information that confirms one's own beliefs. This one was a little bit different than the one I had on your sheet. I couldn't find this exact same one. But if a card has a vowel on one side, then it always has an even number on the other side, is the way it's supposed to be phrased. Which 2 cards did you turn over to show that?
E and 6.
E and 6.
E and 6.
Most people turn E and 6.
I said 6 and J.
That's not the correct answer. It's E and 7. You try to turn over the vowels and the even numbers because that would confirm the rule. But the rule said that if a card has a vowel on one side, then it always has an even number on the other side. Well, let's say you turn this over and it was a consonant, the letter K. Does that tell you anything about the rule?
It's not true.
It tells you nothing about the rule because the rule says if it has a vowel on one side, that comes first. Then it has a consonant. It has an even number on the other side.
It said one side, not front side. I thought that was the catch.
How do you know which side's the front?
Exactly. So you have to consider both sides when it says one side.
No, it's an if-then statement. So you consider the first part of the if first, and then the second part. So if the card has a vowel on one side, so you turn this one over to see if it has an even number on the other side. The other one you turn over is this one. And if that one had a vowel on one side, that would disconfirm the rule.
Right. I still think my
Yeah.
It wouldn't have proved anything if it had a consonant on it.
If it had a consonant, it wouldn't apply to the rule. That's correct.
Exactly.
But you could potentially disprove the rule with this card. This one tells you nothing.
It should have said front side.
If
or
it had a
visible
vowel,
side.
that'd be something.
If it would have a vowel, it just confirms the rule.
That's good.
But you
Worded
can
badly.
you can confirm the rule with this card.
Yeah, it's badly worded.
Why not try to disprove the rule to see if it's not true? You have a chance to do that if you pick this card, but you have no chance to disprove the rule if you don't pick that card. That's the only card that could possibly disprove the rule. But nobody wants to look for
Could a J disprove the rule? Oh, just kidding.
because it
Just kidding,
starts if a
yeah.
card has a vowel on one side. So the J can't disprove the rule either. You can pick a card that proves the rule, and you can pick a card that disproves the rule. And that covers both your bases, you see. This is the kind of stuff they put on IQ tests.
Not a very good question.
Don't feel bad if you miss that one. Most people do. Ha, you idiots. The vast majority of people say they would turn over the E in the 6, but they are wrong. You do need to turn over the E, a vowel, because the number on the other side is even. This is the one that's in your book. Here, I'm reading from your book. You do need to turn over the E, a vowel, because the number on the other side is even. It confirms the rule. And if it's odd, the rule is false. However, the card with a 6 tells you nothing. The rule does not say that a card with an even number must always have a vowel on the other side. So it doesn't matter whether the 6 has a vowel or consonant on the other side. The card you do need to turn over is the 7, because if it has a vowel on the other side, that fact disconfirms the rule. That's part of the confirmation bias. People always want to hear stuff that they agree with. And they ignore stuff that they don't agree with. For instance, if your buddy calls you, we already talked about this one, if your buddy calls you right when you're thinking of him, you go, man, we have ESP. You call, I was thinking of you, and you called right then. That's confirming evidence. You fail to remember the time that he calls you and you weren't thinking of him. Because that doesn't confirm your ESP belief. You're looking for confirming evidence of your ESP belief, not disconfirming evidence. So you forget the misses and you remember the hits. That's the confirmation bias. Man, I was an incredible soccer player when I was in high school. I scored, 15 goals, Or I was an incredible basketball player. I scored 30 points in one game. I failed to mention that 35 games I scored 0 points. And I failed to remember them too. Have you ever heard the saying, the older they are, the better they were? When older people talk about sports, they only remember the confirming thing. Biases due to mental sets. People have a mental set is a way of figuring out a problem or a way you're used to coming up with a solution. And so you got this 9-dot problem. This is kind of an old one, so some of y'all might have already seen this. But the solution is pretty simple, actually. 1, 2, wait, whoops. 1, 2.
Do you want me to draw it? Or... You went through the wrong. You're not supposed to go to the middle one yet.
1, 2, like this,
Yes.
and then
Go to the diagonal. Do you want me to draw it?
3 here,
Yes.
No.
Yes. You just did it in the wrong way.
3.
But
That
you
doesn't
should've-
work.
Hold on.
What you talk about, Will?
Okay.
I used to remember how to do this. Come on,
Okay.
Do it
do you
now.
know it?
Yes. This is.
I've seen it and I can't remember. 1, 2. That's it. Yeah, I did it. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. Good. Very nice. Now, most of us can't do that problem well because we're used to, when we see something like this, we're used to working within the problem, where you're not thinking that you can go past the edges. Because normally when you see something like that, you stay within the... Have you ever heard of the line, thinking outside the box? Mm-hmm. Solving this problem is an example of thinking outside the box. You're actually going outside the dots to figure it out. You could also fold the paper up and stick your point through the dots. Maybe that would work. There's different ways to solve it.
How would I turn that in then?
I don't know. But it's funny, this is a problem that very young kids who haven't seen a lot of problems like this can solve, and older people have trouble with. Because they don't know the rules that you can't go outside, or most things that you deal with, you don't go outside. And so they can solve it. Because they figure, oh, I can go anywhere. Because they don't know the rules of most. You know, I grew up playing that game. Did y'all used to do this? Back before we had video games, we'd have dots. And you do it with your friends. And one would draw a line, and then you draw a line. And if you were the last one to fill the box, you put your initials in it. Did y'all have that?
Yeah.
And so when I look at that, I'm thinking, okay, this is you wouldn't go outside the box in that game, so I'm going to stay inside the box in this game. So I never considered going outside. So we call that a bias due to mental set. My mental set is I stay within the line, within the box. I don't go outside. Most people have that. And so this is often, companies will bring in people from outside the company who don't know the workings of the company to try and solve problems for them that they're having. And often they do better than the people who are entrenched and have been working on the same problems for a long time and can't figure them out. You need new eyes on it, is what they call it. A new perspective. Oh, there we go. Hindsight bias. Whoops. The tendency to overestimate one's ability to have predicted an event once the outcome is known. We call that hindsight bias. You can always, something happens and you say, I knew that was going to happen. I knew I should have put true there or something like that. You know, I knew the Lakers were going to win last night. You didn't really know. That's hindsight bias. And that's one of the I knew it all along phenomenon. You don't really know. If you really knew that the team was going to win, you could go bet all the money you wanted and you'd be a billionaire by now if you ever really knew something for sure. You don't know. There's what I was talking about. The older they get, the better they were when they were younger. Call that hindsight bias. Married couples will say it was love at first sight. We knew we were going to get married, right?
Oh. Lies.
They didn't really. Now looking back, they might say that. Tension in your mind between two opposing viewpoints is called cognitive dissonance. Y'all ever heard that phrase? It's kind of a famous phrase, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance happens when you have two conflicting ideas in your mind. Take a kid who gets caught cheating. One thing they have in their mind is that they're a good person. Most people think they're good people. Another thing they have in their mind is that they just cheated on a test. And so what you have there is cognitive dissonance, conflict between two seemingly opposing viewpoints. To ease the cognitive dissonance, you usually you go one of two ways. You can usually say, well, maybe I'm not such a good person, and most people don't go that route. To say, well, cheating isn't so bad, or he had his paper sitting right there. I couldn't help but looking at it. I'm under too much stress from my parents or family or so forth. There's some way to relieve the cognitive dissonance, and we have a word for that. We call it, does anyone know the word?
Self-validation.
No. Good guess. Starts with an R. Rationalizing. You rationalize your actions to relieve the cognitive dissonance. There was a guy just recently, remember when we had that Mayan calendar thing? There was a guy in California, he said, I'm going to go over to the top of this rock and I'm going to jump off of it right at 2013 or whatever, right at the date. What was the date of that? Do y'all remember? September 20 or December 21st?
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to go over the top of that rock, and the skies are going to open up, and the Mayan god or whatever is going to come out, and I'm going to jump off, and it's going to save the world. And anyway, so the time came, he's up there on the rock, and the time comes, and the Mayan god doesn't appear. So do you think he's got some cognitive dissonance now?
A little bit.
But what do you think he did? Did he say, there's two ways to go with this. You could say, I was wrong all the time, I'm completely nuts. Think he went that route?
No.
What do you think he did?
Jump. No, he tried.
He didn't jump either.
He found a way to explain it.
He rationalized it away. He said, the faith of all of my followers here has delayed the encounter for however many years. He did something like that. And that was predicted, by the way, by some psychologists before he ever went up there, that that's what he would do. So, yeah, you can turn it in. Oh, you need an essay, don't you? There's another term that kind of goes along with this. Justification of effort. If you spend a lot of time working on something, you tend to be more for it. You believe in it more. If you devote a lot of thought to something, you tend to think that the thing is better. For instance, how many times have you seen a movie and read the book, and the book is better than the movie? You say, oh, the book was way better. I mean, it almost always happens, right? There's some justification of effort in there. You spent 2 weeks on the book and 2 hours at the movie. You would tend to think that your effort in reading this big book is justified, that book is really good. And maybe it actually was better than the movie, but perhaps not. Maybe some justification of effort is going in there. People who spend several months pledging a fraternity or a sorority and spend all this time and get whipped and stuff poured on them and all this just to get into this fraternity, man, afterwards they think the fraternity's great. I mean, why else would they have done all that if this fraternity wasn't so great? So some of the strongest emotions towards things are things that you spend a lot of effort on. And that idea is justification of effort. If you spend lots and lots of time talking about, something, I know people who have gone around and then they talk about how, make this huge case about global warming not being real. And they've devoted so much time to it, no matter how much evidence you show them, they will not believe that their case is wrong. Mostly because this justification of effort. They have put so much into it that it doesn't matter what evidence you show them, they will not change their ideas. Even if what they're talking about is completely false. So some interesting things here why people don't reason rationally. Starting on page 222. Read that for homework. And we're continuing. Yeah, we got some time here. With John Stossel. Thank you, sir. Will you put it in the bottom?
Great. And I explained the part. John